Okay, so it has not exactly been a secret that Sony has been getting flamed for years about their spin-off Spider-Man universe that does not contain Spider-Man. And yes, I am recording a Marvel video while wearing a Superman t-shirt with a Justice League poster in the background for the lols. But anyway, so it has been no secret that Sony's been getting flamed for ages about their Sony Venom spin-off universe. And people have already made numerous videos, like, joking and taking the piss out of this universe. That's, at least, not really what I want to do with this video. With this video, I want to actually give Sony some credit for their movies, because I don't think, inherently, their ideas for their movies were bad. Were the movies themselves bad? Yes. I'm not going to say they were some masterpieces that deserve Oscars. They're not. But I do think, generally, the movies are not as bad as people said, and I do think some of them do have really good ideas, just executed terribly. So first off, we'll go in film order. So first off, we had Venom. Now, Venom, I do think, in regards to criticism, is the movie where I can offer the least, and where I think most people can offer the least. Like, that movie made nearly $1 billion at the box office. And that movie was genuinely, at least for a Venom movie, a pretty good film. Like, Tom Hardy does really great in that movie as both Eddie Brock and the symbiote Venom. And, you know, it's just funny because you can tell he is just having so much fun on set. Like, I don't even, like, I swear half the thing with, like, him just jumping in that lobster tank and stuff was just, like, improv. Because, like, you cannot convince me that that was an actual scene that they wrote in it. Then again, with some of the writing from Morbius and Madame Web, yeah, I can believe that that was a scene. So, Venom, like, honestly, I think the action for that was quite good. I think Tom Hardy's acting was good. I do think, like, you know, the way they actually let Venom, delete people was quite good, because I did kind of think that tone him down a lot for that. And I think the fact that they didn't do that was quite good. I think the two weakest parts of Venom are definitely, obviously, the lack of Spider-Man, because then he does not have a spider symbol, or really any obvious motive to be doing anything. Although I do think the motive that they gave him in the movie worked, because they still kind of kept his comic origin of him being this kind of disgruntled reporter that then finds the symbiote, and then the two of them kind of have this bond for both being these kind of outcast losers that decide that they can only really better themselves by working together. And the other complaint is the villain. Like, and I will agree on that one wholeheartedly. Riot is an extremely mid-villain. Saying that, though, the other thing that I will give pretty much all of Sony's Venom, I mean all of Sony's spin-off movies credit for, is them actually just having villains who are evil for the sake of being evil. Because that's one thing that the MCU has kind of notoriously done, where most of their villains either have redemption arcs, redeeming qualities, or, like, you know, some terrible traumatic upbringing that quite explicitly makes them become a villain, or even characters like Thanos or Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming. Like, although them two, in the eyes of the superhero and the general populace, are evil and the things they're doing are bad, like, in their own minds, they are the heroes of the story, and because you see their points of view, you kind of see, oh, you know, this is why they're doing the thing that they're doing. So it's still like, yeah, Thanos is this horrible guy that just disintegrates half of humanity, but at the same time, you kind of feel for him and get why he's doing that. Whereas, you know, the MCU, I mean, yeah, in its earlier phases with, like, Obadiah Stane and stuff, you had bad guys who were just cartoonishly evil for the sake of being cartoonishly evil. But certainly more recently, like, since the MCU's been mainstream, most of their villains have had some form of, like, redeeming thing about them. Whereas Sony's villains, like, I don't think a single villain in the Sony spin-off universe has some redeeming quality about them. They are just, like, cartoonish comic book villains who are evil for the sake of being evil. Like, would I have liked Riot to have far more development? Even if you don't want to give development to the human dude whose name I can't even remember, you could at least give some development to the symbiote and be like, oh, this symbiote on their home planet was actually like the dictator ruler of the planet or something, and now he's come to Earth to try and do the same thing. You know, that's all you really needed, but it then kind of would have made you, like him a bit more. But overall, like, Venom is definitely the strongest of the Sony movies, and I do, as I said, have less to criticize, but to some extent I also have less to give some credit for, because the Venom movie, like, it is doing basically everything you already want a Venom movie to do, so there's not as much that I can say about it. But if we then, technically, Venom 2 is the next movie that came out. But I want to touch on Morbius first, because Morbius starts exemplifying my point. So Morbius, yes, the product we got in the end is kind of garbage. At the same time, it is, like, weirdly, I mean, it's not a comfort movie, like, that's not the right way of saying it, but it is, like, one of my sort of guilty pleasure movies that I will, like, genuinely actually watch, because, like, I do just kind of find the whole thing with it funny. So Morbius, like, is a strange character to be doing a film about, because who the hell a general audience has heard of Morbius? Not exactly many people. I have heard of Morbius. I am one of about 10 people, including, like, new rock stars and Comic Drake, that actually know who Morbius is. But Morbius in the comics is, like, this anti-hero, because in the comics they do this whole arc called Spider Island. I do not have time to get into that. But Morbius is kind of the main good guy of that, because he develops this cure which basically saves most of humanity. But he doesn't get given credit for it, because he kind of was a villain previously. Because Morbius' whole thing is kind of like the Incredible Hulk, in the point where he doesn't want to be a monster, but the world sees him as this monster, and he's constantly battling with himself, basically, of like, okay, well, what do I want to do with my life? Do I want to be the bad guy and go after these other people and go blee 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 and suck on the blood and all that, or do I want to be a superhero? And I think that is actually a good, cool idea for a movie. Like, I think Morbius weirdly does lend himself quite well to having his own movie, if you do this big inner struggle, and especially because before he gets his powers, he is like the sickly doctor, and the main reason he gives himself powers in the first place is to try and cure this medical condition that him and thousands of other people suffer from, because he's like, if I can cure myself, then I can make the lives of so many other people better. So I think, on paper, Morbius is a good movie, and I can't fault Sony for the greenlighting it. I can fault Sony for the execution of it. And I think below the movie we got, there should have been a much better movie, because originally the movie was supposed to release in 2020. It did not release till April the 1st of 2022. And it got extensive reshoots, rewrites, everything, basically. They changed, like, a lot of the movie. Because I think they wanted the movie to be set in the MCU. And Michael Keaton's Vulture is in the trailers for the movie. And then he's just in, like, this weird hidgery-hodgery after credit scene instead. And I think if the movie had released as part of the official MCU, like, canon, and been able to do what I imagine either the director or certainly some of the writers wanted to do with the movie, it could have been, like, quite good. Because I think if you had Morbius and then Matt Smith's character be these two sickly people with this medical condition, then Michael Morbius then invents this amazing cure, but it gives him this vampirism. And then, because the movie itself kind of tries to tackle this thing where, like, oh, Michael Morbius is, like, the good guy because he's not giving in to, like, the monster, whereas Matt Smith's character is giving into the monster. I think you could have done quite well with that, especially if Michael Keaton's Vulture had been more of a character. Because Michael Keaton's Vulture is kind of similar in the point of, like, he is a bad guy, but he refuses to give out Spider-Man's secret identity at the end of the movie because he has some code of honor. And I think if you had him get involved with Michael Morbius, like, after Morbius first gets his powers, like, you have them to make some sort of, like, villainous alliance, and then they both get arrested, as is, like, the shot in the trailer that was originally supposed to be in the movie. So say them two get together, they do something evil, then, Morbius gets arrested. And then as a result of that, he's like, no, wait, I don't want to work with people like the Vulture. I can be this better guy, like, I can be the superhero. But then meanwhile, while he's been off going to, like, prison and whatnot, you then have had Matt Smith's character learn about this cure and about the fact that it gives you superpowers. So then he takes it and decides to be the bad guy. Like, he's like, oh, everybody shunned me and bullied me my whole life. I want revenge. So you then have him have revenge. So then Morbius is kind of forced to break out of prison and kind of confront his own demons and be like, okay, well, now I can try and redeem myself and save the world from, this other guy who's basically my evil self. I do think, as I said, that movie could have been a lot better. Obviously, the movie we got, as I said, was not that at all, because, for a start, we got Jared Leto, which, yeah. I will say he did at least look like the character. I get from that point of view why they cast Jared Leto, but beyond that, the writing was all over the place. The reshoots happened, but, so as I said, I will have to defend Sony for once that I do think conceptually, in another universe, Morbius released and was a genuinely good movie. It's just that's not the reality we live in. Venom 2, I feel vastly more negatively about than I do Morbius. Because Venom 2, though I do still think, could have had this great idea. You have Carnage as this villain, but you do not use him barely at all in the movie, and you tone his violence down so much, and his character down so much, that he is barely recognizable as Carnage. And again, I think if that movie had far more directly adapted Maximum Carnage, the comic event, and you had Carnage just being, doing this, like, I was gonna say Deadpool movie levels of violence. Like, if you think of the bye, like, opening thing of Deadpool 3, like, if you kind of imagine Carnage just doing that to, like, slews of people, and then you have Venom, who has to firstly deal with the fact of, like, do I want to be this lethal protector or don't I? Then be, okay, well, I've accidentally unleashed this basically tyrannical mass deleter, and now I've got to try and stop him. That could be a really, again, good thing, like, moral thing for Venom, of, like, we're trying to fight this hunger, this desire to get rid of the villains that we defeat. But now Carnage is out here basically doing, who's completely given into his violent tendencies because he was already a bad guy before he even got the symbiote. You could do this really interesting thing with that, and I do think if Carnage had been handled better in the movie, the whole movie would have automatically been so much better. If you had really made, because, like, how Infinity War is about Thanos. If you had made Venom 2, I was going to say about Carnage, like, I don't say do it from the point of view of Carnage, because, that would just be kind of weird. But you make Carnage the big focal point of this movie, and you just have him be this absolute tyrannical force that, Venom needs to fight. And then, if they'd been allowed to use Spider-Man, like, stick Tom Holland's Spider-Man in that movie too, sure. So again, I think the concept of Venom 2 should have been good, but, the execution for that one is honestly, like, probably the worst of the movies, and I know we still have Madam Web to talk about, I have not forgotten that, but I do, to some extent, think that Venom 2 is worse for kind of fundamentally misunderstanding the point, if you get what I mean. But I've mentioned Madam Web, so let's go on to Madam Web. So Madam Web, as has now been pretty publicly documented, was supposed to be effectively the origin story, or the pre-origin story of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. So what Madam Web was originally supposed to be was Ezekiel Stane, who's the villain of Madam Web. He was supposed to fight Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the future, get beaten horrifically badly by Tom Holland's Spider-Man, then decide, okay, well, curse him. I'll then spend ages stalking him, working out his secret identity, and then I'm gonna go back in time to kill Peter Parker when he's a child, so he will never become Spider-Man, to never beat me in the first place. That is a really cool plot for a movie, genuinely. And so again, I get why they went, why they greenlit the movie, because if you have Madam Web, who's clairvoyant, who can see the future, and she's, sees that, oh, this guy's from the future and he's going after this baby, and now I've got to defend this baby from this, creature from the future. That would be such a cool plot for a movie. But even after they scrapped that idea, I think even the original, not the original, the changed plot of the movie still could have worked. Because the changed plot, you have Ezekiel instead get beaten by 3 different Spider Women. So again, same principle, he tries to defeat them before they ever become Spider People, so then whatever. And Madam Web has to defend them. And because they don't have their powers yet, Madam Web is, by using her precognition, has to defeat basically this evil Spider-Man. And I do think even then the idea of that could work, because I do think a few of the scenes in Madam Web are genuinely quite cool. Because the scene where she's using her abilities to sneak them through this fireworks factory, to dodge where the fireworks are going to hit because she knows where they're going in advance, to make them hit Ezekiel instead, is actually a cool scene. And I think if the whole movie had been like that, where she's needing to use her powers in these super clever, complex ways to set traps for Ezekiel in advance of him ever being at this place in the first place, that could have been cool. And obviously people complain, in all the marketing, you showed these people in the spider suits, and then they're literally in the spider suits for, 30 seconds, in, a flash forward. I do think they shouldn't have put them in the marketing, because I do think you still could have made a good movie without ever having to have these characters become Spider People in the movie itself. The biggest problem is the writing for Madam Web. And obviously the ADR, we've all seen the scene of Ezekiel where he's just yapping completely different words to what he is actually saying. But I do think with competent writing, even the changed idea for that movie could have been good. It just really wasn't. And similar to Morbius, it's also let down by the actors kind of being terrible. Because Dakota Johnson she does not want to be there. That much is quite obvious. She does not want to be there. So I think if you had got different writers and different actors, I do think the movie could have been good. It just, it wasn't. But again, in Sony's defense, I get why they greenlit it, and I get what they wanted to do with the movie. They just did not do that. So then Venom 3. Venom 3 is weirdly, I was going to say my favorite Venom movie. From a critical standpoint, Venom 1 is still my favorite Venom movie. From a, in general, silly enjoyment perspective, Venom 3 is my favorite Venom movie. I think the action with weird alien scorpion thingies whatever the heck they are. They're like the Acklay from Star Wars. I think the scenes with them things was actually quite cool. I thought Null's design was very cool. And I thought the getting to actually see the other symbiotes then kind of combine together to form a hybrid to try and help defend Venom at the end was good. Although I am just going to go on a tangent back to Venom 2 for a second, because Venom 3 briefly continues this thing with this character called Patrick Mulligan from Venom 2. And another plot point I think they should have done in Venom 2 is if after Carnage causes problems, Venom tries to fight him, realizes he can't. They then decide, okay, well, we need another symbiote superhero. But this time we're going to try and not repeat the mistakes the first time of, giving this awful guy a symbiote. So they instead deliberately seek out this police detective because he is a genuinely good guy. And they feel like if we give him a symbiote, he'll be better than we ever could be and will be better than Carnage, and then the two of us can defeat Carnage. Like, that could have also been an interesting plot point. But anyway, going back to Venom 3. Again, I think the general premise of that movie, with wanting to set up this big, symbiote war of having Null try and invade Earth and doing the, King in Black storyline, I think that, again, could have worked. And I don't know if it has been publicly said that Venom 3 wasn't originally supposed to be the final film or not. But Venom 3 is the most not final movie ever, because it's quite obviously trying to set up a fourth and final movie. But I feel like because Madam Web and Morbius and Venom 2 didn't do well at the box office, they last minute decided, wait, we can't risk it, we need to wrap it up here, because the scene of Venom dying at the end of the movie feels so tagged on to the end of the movie. The marketing kind of edited the trailers of oh, this is this big final send-off. But when you're watching the movie itself, it does not feel like that whatsoever. So I think if you were going to make it the final movie, you either needed to full commit to it, or not make it the final movie. Because again, I think some ideas in this film are really good. Like I said, the King in Black storyline, these other symbiotes. No, I also think Venom and Eddie now, they've been together so long now that they're finally okay, we do actually need each other. We are this perfect codex of a symbiote. We are supposed to be together. It's kind of our destiny or what have you. It's just, again, the execution lets the movie down so much, which, as I said, is just the recurring thing of this video, basically, is just execution. But again, on paper, I do think the movie could have been good. Now, a couple of days ago, I saw Kraven the Hunter. I had not seen this movie. This was the only Spider-Man movie that I hadn't... this weird venomverse movie. Kraven was basically the only one of these movies that I had not gone to the cinema to see. So I'd only just seen it on streaming literally a couple of days before making this video. And Kraven is really what made me make this video in the first place. Because Kraven is probably, next to the first Venom movie, the best one of these movies. Because Kraven gets things so right and yet so wrong. Because Kraven's father is done very well. Dimitri, I thought, was done very well. The Rhino is kind of based off the version of the Rhino from the Ultimate Spider-Man, kids show. Which is kind of a very strange choice. I have seen that show, though. So for me, I actually did like Rhino in this movie. I did actually think Rhino was, again, done quite well. The biggest problem was Kraven, because they kind of made him, again, an anti-hero when he just is not one whatsoever. Because, with Morbius making him an anti-hero, makes sense, because he is one. Kraven is not one, and Kraven needed to be a worse person, which sounds kind of weird, but truthfully, he did need to be more of a horrible guy. But I did think the base idea, again, of this movie, because Kraven is a 15, and it does get pretty violent in places, And that's something I actually like, because when most of Sony's, Spider-Man's villains are fighting Spider-Man and doing stuff with Spider-Man, because most of Spider-Man's stuff is aimed at children, or at least at 12-year-olds in the case of the MCU movies. There's only so much violence and things that his villains can do because they're restricted to this thing. Yes, in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the Green Goblin still gets rid of Gwen Stacy. And yeah, Norman Osborn's Green Goblin kills Aunt May in No Way Home. But they're one specific death of a character, and it's not really that violent. It's more, I was going to say cartoon violence. It's not, but it's not really R-rated violence either. So I think doing a movie like this, where you get to see the character just be this genuinely bad guy and do this bad stuff, is really, really interesting. And I think that, along with making villains just actual evil for the sake of being evil, are the two things that I really like from Sony's universe, and that I think more companies genuinely should do, because I've been wanting DC for ages. I know they've done the S-Squad movies, and I know they did do Joker, but I've wanted them to do, say, an anthology series about Batman's villains, where you just get to see these villains be these cartoonish, over-the-top guys, but that can also do, these twisted acts of violence. But you just don't ever get that, because the stories are always done from Batman's point of view, from Spider-Man's point of view. You don't get to see the inner workings of these characters. And I just read this book, this Marvel book called The Patriot List. And that book is about the Dark Reign, which is this comic storyline. But the book is told from the point of view of Norman Osborn and his Dark Avengers. And that book does such a good thing of showing you the inner workings of Norman Osborn's brain, and how he sees himself as this superior scientist, this ultimate guy who is just better than everyone else. And with Kraven, although they change his character vastly to the comics, you still kind of get that. You see Kraven, he is this superior being to people. He considers himself the apex predator, and he's still, although in this movie he's more going after people and criminals rather than going after animals and, Spider-Man, in the comics, you still get, the reason Kraven is doing this is, he's kind of obviously far more heroic in this movie than he is in the comics, but he's more doing this to get back at his father, to prove he's better than his father, to prove that he is better than these people. Not because of a good... Because Spider-Man, he protects people because it's the right thing to do. Kraven is protecting people because he thinks he should do it to prove his superiority to other people. And I think we kind of need more movies like Kraven and like this book that I read. And I think Sony, if their movies had had better writing and done better, I think the characters could have got such great, complex things. Like with Venom, you have the turmoil initially of him being this lethal protector, him being this dark guy, but then he fights people like Carnage and then realizes, okay, I don't want to be like this guy. I want to be the better person, so I will tone back my dark side and be more like people like Spider-Man. And then you have Morbius, who, as I said, you could do a thing of kind of like the Hulk, of okay, well, I've cured this disease technically, but now I've got this own curse that I've got to deal with. I've got to fight my inner demons on a regular basis. And and as I said, with Kraven, you could really see the inner workings of these villains. And I do think if these movies had been popular enough, and we had got movies about the Green Goblin, we had got movies about these other characters, that we could have got really interesting stuff. And I'm glad with the case of Spider-Man Noir that they're still doing these things, because Spider-Man Noir, personality-wise, is super different to, like, 616 Peter Parker. So I'm really glad we're getting these other projects about at least these other Spider people, so we can still get different perspectives on these characters and different ways of thinking. And also, like, with the season 1 of My Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, you had Tombstone in that show, and I know that version of Tombstone is nothing like the comics, but because he was an equal main character to Peter Parker, you really felt like you understood him and what was going on with his life. And as I said, I think that is the thing that superhero media needs to stop doing as much, is focusing on the main character. Like, yes, Spider-Man, Batman, they are the big box office draws which people want to go and see. But as I said, I think like things like My Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man show that even if you want to still make the show about the titular character of Spider-Man, you can still show these other perspectives and these other things and still just let characters do stuff. And I wouldn't be against them doing an actual Spider-Man movie where he either fights the Sinister Six or you try and re-adapt Carnage, where the villains are just these outright terrible people that are just causing all of this chaos. Because, like, Civil War briefly touches on this with, like, the calamities caused between, like, superhero battles. But that's really the only movie that touches on that. Whereas, again, you're done, like, you do a Maximum Carnage movie with, like, Cloak and Dagger and Spider-Man and stuff in it, and you just show Carnage just ripping through New York like it's another Tuesday, then that would be an interesting movie. So yeah, I do think Sony had good ideas. I just think the execution is what let them down. But I don't think these movies deserve as much hate as they get. And I do think there is some lessons that other companies can genuinely learn from these movies, which, for a start, is have better writing and do better ADR. But beyond that, like, there is potential to make movies like this that are good. So let me know what you thought of the failed Sony cinematic universe and whether you thought my takes are the worst thing on Earth or whether you actually agreed with any of them. So, Kieran in editing here. If you want to see me do a video on actually decent Spider-Man movies, then I do have a video currently in the works where I'm looking at the use of music in the Spider-Verse, like, animated movies. That will also feature some other films that aren't related to Spider-Man whatsoever. But one of the main things of that video is going to be talking about the animated Spider-Verse movie. So if you're interested in watching that video, then please subscribe to the channel, because that should hopefully be coming out in the next few weeks.